In this week's Parsha Reeh, Moshe tells us that the permanent temple for God will be located in the place that God shall choose. There Moshe says, Lo ta'asun, you shall not do, kechol asher anachnu osim po hayom, like all that we do here today, each kol hayashar be'inav, each person doing what he thinks is right. What is everyone doing such that Moshe tells Israel that things will be different in the future temple? Ibn Ezra comments that the plain meaning seems to be that many of the gifts and portions shared with the Kohen and others upon bringing an offering were dependent upon being in the land, meaning while they were still in the desert, many of the priestly gifts were actually voluntary. So each person could actually decide whether or not to give the various gifts or portions in part or in whole that they would be required to give once they entered the land. While this might sound reasonable, nonetheless, Ibn Ezra comments that he doesn't think that this is the full answer. Ibn Ezra posits that not all people were God-fearing, and many people ended up doing what they wanted when bringing an offering to God. Moshe was telling them in our verse that while this behavior might have been acceptable in the desert, once they enter the land, and especially once the temple will be built, then they would be expected to act appropriately and not follow their own whims or desires. Ramban takes Ibn Ezra to task for this explanation and asks how can Ibn Ezra dare accuse Israel of doing wrong, especially when Moshe was not accusing Israel in the least of doing something wrong. Moshe was stating a fact and not making an accusation. Rather, Moshe was informing them that the rules of offerings were slightly different in the desert than they would be after they entered the land and build the temple. What was correct for the Mishkan and the desert might not be correct for the temple, and the people would need to adjust accordingly. Perhaps Moshe had something else in mind. There are many things that Moshe said about the permanent temple. However, Moshe stressed one thing in the previous verse that he did not do before. When appearing before God, Usmachtem, and you shall rejoice, bechol mishlach yedchem, in everything that you do. Sforno relates the rejoicing in that verse to Tehillim number 100, which says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. Sforno says that this is the correct mindset one should have when worshiping God. We can then say that Moshe in our verse was thus teaching the people that in the future temple there will be a special added mitzvah of rejoicing when serving God, something that they may not have done when serving God in the desert. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says that this shows how different Judaism is from the ancient and even the not-so-ancient religions and isms of the day. The stress in the other religions and isms was of fear of the gods, of those in power, and many times even discouraging happiness. Judaism, in contrast, is one of rejoicing. God wants to see us happy, especially in relation to Him. The Gemara in Pesachim 117a says that prophecy is only possible through rejoicing. In the desert, the people felt God and His presence. They didn't need that extra injection of rejoicing in order to feel close to Him. Once we entered the land, however, and the day-to-day took over, God's presence became less apparent to the average person, and we would need the extra rejoicing that Moshe prescribed in order to help us come close. Even though we might not yet have the temple today, maybe through adding the extra rejoicing that Moshe prescribed, even in the hard times, will help prepare ourselves to rebuild the temple and merit being able to connect to God in the manner that He envisions. Shabbat Shalom.